Michelle Marie McGrath. Welcome to today's episode of Unclassified Woman, and today we're off to one of my favourite places in the world, Ireland, to speak to Mary Reynolds. Mary was the youngest woman to win a gold medal at the prestigious Chelsea Flower Show. She's an Irish garden and landscape designer, famous for her wild garden at Kew Royal Botanical Gardens in London. Her life was the inspiration behind the film Dare to be Wild. Now, this is just such a gorgeous, feel-good film, so I highly recommend that you download that to watch it after you've listened to this episode. And The Garden Awakening, Mary's absolutely gorgeous book, which is also beautifully illustrated, is really not your typical gardening book. In fact, Mary actually describes herself as a guardian rather than a gardener because, you know, she is all about having a relationship with your land and really working in harmony with the land and Mother Nature and allowing the garden to grow into what it really wants to be, obviously with some guidance, very much in the way that a parent guides its beloved child. So you can learn how to design and nurture your own beautiful garden or piece of land and create a very vibrant and magical space. Mary has been described as a creative spirit whose work is so deeply anchored to the earth that her gardens are always a partnership rather than an imposition. What a lovely way to be described. So I hope you enjoy this episode and gain lots of inspiration from it. So welcome, Mary. So great to have you here today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thanks, Michelle. It's lovely to talk to you.
So I loved your book and I loved the whole story behind it of how you came to have that experience and your thinking and your principles about that connection that we've got with the land and how important it is. And so one of the comments that I read that I really loved was how, you've been described as a custodian of the land and a creature of the forest. So what do you think about that? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I guess it does. I suppose when I was younger and still really, I never really had much time for people. I like them now, a lot, but I don't necessarily trust them a huge amount. And I made all my connections with nature, and specifically woodlands are places where I feel very much at home. Now, not all woodlands want to have you in there with them, but I guess ones that are themselves trusting of people. It's kind of an interlinked relationship, but I always feel very much at home in nature. That's my family connections are made there. And so, yeah, I feel very protective of nature, strongly connected with it, and that's a strange thing to say because really I also understand that, connecting with nature is connecting with your own heart and it's very strongly linked,
And so have you felt that since you were a child? Was it something that your parents encouraged, or was that just something that you had that innate knowing from a very early age of that connection?
Well, the connection probably was innate. My parents were busy. They both had full-time jobs and they had a farm to run and they had 6 kids. So I was the youngest of them, and everything we needed was there, but they didn't have a lot of time in their lives. So, I used to go out and I made my connections with nature, because you'd go out in the morning and you'd kind of disappear off into the fields. And there was one particular experience that I had when I was a kid, which I guess is one of the strongest memories I have. And it kind of dictated a lot of my life since then. And that I can tell you a little bit about that if you like.
Yeah,
It's
please.
So it was when I was young, and I don't remember exactly. I know I was like, it was between 5 and 7, somewhere around then. I had chubby, short legs. I remember that much. But I remember wandering off one day, as you do, and nobody knows where you are, and nobody asks where you are. You just, there's a, you just, I wandered off into the fields, and there was a little field on the top of my family's farm, and it was uh, a place I was always drawn to. But I remember going into it this particular day, and when I walked in, I noticed that something had changed behind me. And I remember looking behind, and this gap that I had walked through, which is about 4 meters wide, was suddenly gone. And all the shrubs and trees had moved together so that there was no way out of that field. And I was really frightened, and I walked around in a small little field, and I really couldn't understand what had happened. Obviously, it would be frightening for a kid,
Yeah.
for anyone, And I walked around the edges of the field, couldn't find my way out. And eventually, I got distracted by the sunshine and tiny little butterflies, and I sat down in the meadow that was in the field, and kind of just stopped being scared. And after a while, I noticed that I was surrounded by energies, and it was all the plants and trees in the ditches were leaning towards me, energetically, I guess, not physically, and there was this feeling that they were all really vying for my attention, and that some of them they all had unique personalities, and some of them were kind of, you know, bullies. And some of them were like cross, and some of them were really innocent and bright, and they all had unique personalities, but I remember wondering why they wanted me to look at them or to notice them. And that question stayed with me for ages. And it's only when I started to write my book that I really had to look at it. And I realized that eventually it was like the missing part of a puzzle that I've been dealing with my whole life. And I realized that all those plants and all those creatures were part of my family, and I hadn't taken any notice of them, and that I was part of their family, and they openly loved me. But it's like having a child that you take no notice of. I mean, good God, like, of course it's going to really want your attention. And the poor plants had to force me to sit in a field that they cloaked to make me notice them.
They were just feeling ignored. You really had that
Yeah.
sense, and they were like, look at us, notice us.
Yeah. And that's what happened. They had to go to that extreme to make that happen. So eventually, like a neighbor's daughter shouted across the hedge at some point later in the day, and when I looked around, the gap was there, and I went back home. But I had said it to my dad, but not till I was 18, because you didn't really say anything to your parents because they didn't take much notice because they were still busy. And I remember I told my dad about it when I was 18, and the same thing had happened to his grandfather in that field, and he was in there for the whole night.
Oh,
Get
wow.
out. And it was well known locally as what people call here as a fairy field. It was called the stray sod, but I guess people call, I don't know. I mean, look, everyone has different understandings of what fairies are, but for me,
Yeah.
it's the spirits of plants, and sometimes people maybe see them as personifications, but
Yeah, like
they're
plant
just,
divas as well. People are often, refer to them, don't they? And if you think about when
yeah,
people make vibrational essences with flower essences and things like that, they really feel that connection with the spirit of the plant.
yeah. Yeah, that's it. I mean, I could connect with any living creature. So, yeah, I guess that's when I started to really connect with nature in that sense. And then, it's not like I'm any different from anyone else. I just made my connections in different ways. And then of course I lost those connections for a long time and went off and became a teenager, and discovered all sorts of substances that I could make connections through. And that's I suppose it took me a long time to find my way back, but I did, thank God,
Yeah, and that's, I suppose, just that's kind of the metaphor for life, isn't it, really? And so, do you feel that connection, Mary, like with all places that you go to visit, all lands, or do you feel it more strongly in certain places? Like, I know that you're talking about how it's almost like so many of us have lost that sense of wild connection and that there aren't as many places that are really, full of that vibrancy as much now on the planet. So, do you feel quite a difference in that connection when you go and visit, like say when you go to work on projects or if you travel to other places, do you feel those differences?
Yeah, I mean, the Earth is a body, and it's a body made up of unique individual places. And yeah, I mean, all of us are drawn to different places because different places have their own vibrations, their own um, damage. Um, different places have unique personalities. I mean, there's a couple of things in that. One is that wild places are, far and few between, and that's an absolutely direct reflection of the fact that we've lost our own inner wildness. There's
Yeah,
very, I mean, the because we're just direct. People are mirrors of the earth, and the health of the earth is directly reflected in our own health, and vice versa. So that's the most important understanding, because people talk about, does it really matter, you know, about the earth not being so well? And I guess it comes back to self-care, which is something I see
yeah,
you write about a lot. And if you care about yourself, then you're going to have to care about the earth. It's totally interlinked. So,
completely.
so wild places are not really, it's very interesting because they don't really have connections with people generally, okay? Because they're they're independent of them. They're like children that have raised themselves
Yeah,
without any parents, without any guidance. And so they have become very, often it can go very wrong, but eventually they will find themselves usually to becoming a mature ecosystem.
yeah, we
But
hear a lot, don't we, about trees, how trees really like form their own community, like their roots
yeah,
interlink and they sort of feed and nourish each other.
yeah, they do. And but if you leave a piece of land which is bare to its own devices, it will eventually find its way to that place. But lots of things can go wrong. There's fires, there's damage, there's all sorts of things that can go wrong that will cause that process to become very long, and we don't really have time for that anymore, because we've kind of done a lot of damage. We have to kind of actually help land get to that point a little bit faster. And that's kind of what I wrote my book about,
Yeah,
is about how to help people heal land a little bit quicker, because to fast track the process, really. Because if you raise a child like that, you sort of say to it, go off there now and you'll be grand. The problem, the distressing part of that way of raising a child is that you won't have a connection with that child, no
yeah,
more than you would with a piece of land. And there's a huge magic that happens when you have a connection with a piece of land that you become the custodian or the guardian of.
yeah.
That that's where the magic happens, and people have forgotten that we have the ability to have that magic. And I talk about this stuff a lot. Like when I give a talk, often people laugh because they think it's funny. They think it's funny that we have the ability to have that connection with places. But
Well, it just really
um,
shows the level of disconnection, doesn't it? And,
yeah,
like we're saying, that often people are drawn to. I mean, often I know sometimes it takes for somebody to retire or to be unwell, where they might be drawn to gardening or to learn more about gardening so that they can put their hands in the soil and feel that connection to nature. But then really one of the things I do find interesting is what you're saying is that often, it's about being the guardian, not the gardener, because often with gardening, you're actually going against the natural environment and trying to control it into performing and behaving a way that's not actually natural to that piece of land. So can you share more of your thoughts about that? Because I think that is so valid, and it's interesting, but it's not something that we think of in that way generally.
Um, well, when I started writing the book, I was writing initially about the film that came out about a few minutes of my life, um, and then I decided that was boring because I told that story so often to the screenwriter. So I started writing about my work, and I very quickly wrote my way out of a job, and that was because I realized that even though all my land designs had been beautiful, and they were designed in harmony with like nature's patterns, they didn't want to stay as I had designed them. The land had its own intentions, and I was working against them by maintaining the garden, by
Yeah.
basically controlling it and not allowing it to become what it wanted to become.
Now that you have that awareness,
Mm.
what do you do now differently? So, say when you go to work with a piece of land,
Yeah.
what is it that you do? Because you said that, we really need to listen to nature and listen to what it wants. So, what's your process or ritual for connecting in with the land to see what it wants to become so that you can work in harmony with it? How would you do that in kind of simplistic terms?
Well, it took me a whole book to explain that, because it's simple, but yet
Yeah, deep.
it's like anything. It's like a healing process. So
Yeah,
it is step by step process. So I guess the thing to understand is that the people I'm working with to help them design their land, that they have to take responsibility for forming the connection. Because what I used to do was form the connection with the land myself, and then when I walked away, the land was bereft. And
yes.
and so now I have to get people to understand that I'm just a midwife, that I need to understand through them what's going on. And generally, people are attracted to pieces of land, like you say, because they have the same needs as the land itself. So some pieces of land, for example, my own land has a massive problem with trusting people. It doesn't trust me at all. It's slowly learning to trust me.
Yeah,
Um, it's has major problems with abandonment, and this has happened to me a lot in my past. Is abandonment is a big thing, and so everyone's land is basically reflection of their own kind of damage. So the
yeah,
damage land holds itself will be what. So if you're drawn to a place, it's because that land that you're drawn to needs to heal the same stuff that you need to heal.
yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so like you were saying, the land will show you what you need to work on in your own life
Yeah.
and
So
in
I
your
can't,
relationships or, your personal dynamics.
yeah. So I can't do that for other people.
Yeah,
I mean, I can help them understand what those steps are, and I can help them design spaces that are based on different patterns and symbols that may feel that they resonate with, and because those symbols and patterns are things that are going to bring healing into the land as well as into their own lives. But the thing is that land wants to become a multi-tiered woodland system generally, um, and to work with land to help it become that, like not to take too much of the land for ourselves, and to work with it to allow it to become what it wants to become. Now, it's not like that everywhere. I mean, there are floodplains and tops of mountains and savannas and places that don't want to become woodlands, And
yeah,
also that if land does become a woodland, that you have to remember that we are the guardians, we're the light holders. So we have to hold the light. So sometimes we have to manage it to allow more light through so that the ecosystem is at its highest point. Because if you let land go completely without any management as such, it would become a heavy, dark canopy of trees,
yeah,
and not that much would live in there. So our job is actually to kind of hold the light. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and you mentioned before about how like there are probably some woodlands that you shouldn't go into because it's not that great, the feeling, and they don't necessarily want you in there. Why do you feel that is? Is that because of things that might have happened there, or I don't know, like what would be the reason for that? Because obviously we all have that sixth sense sometimes where we might go to a place and it just doesn't feel that great, like we pick up on the energy and we can think, okay, this looks beautiful, but actually it feels, like I feel kind of a bit uncomfortable here. There's something about it that doesn't sit quite right with me.
Sometimes my sister had a dog, for example, who was absolutely terrified of men because she got the dog from a shelter, and the dog had been basically terrorized by a man to turn him into a guard dog, and he just wasn't that type of creature.
Yeah.
So sometimes woodlands don't trust people in the same way. So if you have a woodland that's been guided and raised by a loving guardian who kind of really loves the place and really cares for it, then when a person goes into those woods, the woods and the trees and the plants and the creatures there are going to react in a positive way
Yeah.
because their experience of people is a good one. But if you've got a place that has only experienced neglect, abuse, then it is not going to want you in there. So no matter how much work you can do as a passer through to say, look, you can just bless them and say, send them your love and say, explain that not everybody is like this, and that, if there's anything you can do, pick up rubbish as you walk through.
Yeah.
You can do little things to actually help build their trust. And that will do a lot for you as well as for the woods. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I do find it interesting, this connection that we have to the land, and how we hear a lot of talk now about the return of the divine feminine, and how often the way that we're treating the planet is another reflection of how women are treated, for example, or how women's bodies are treated. In so many places around the world, women still don't really have like control or sovereignty over decisions made about their own bodies. And so it seems like the connection with that is really apparent.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we're directly, well, the earth is the embodiment of that feminine energy. So it's I mean, the neglect and abuse of the land is directly a reflection of that, the way that
Yeah.
women are in the world. And it's pretty bad, it's pretty bad at the moment. I mean, even like the amount of chemicals that are poured onto the earth. I mean, women are covering themselves. I mean, most teenagers in Ireland look like Oompa Loompas, like they're all covered in fake tan. What the hell is wrong with everybody? They're so bland. But then it's the diversity in the earth is becoming less and less the whole time. So the land is all starting to look the same. And so it's just a reflection of, I mean, that's a simplistic version, but the abuse of the land is absolutely reflected in the way women are abused for sure. But like, I mean, if you go back through history, I mean, 14 million women were killed by, the Catholic Church in the guise of the Spanish Inquisition.
Yeah.
And back then the earth was not as badly abused, but it was a direct attack on the feminine energy.
It was, and I
Uh,
suppose there was, well, like in the past, more people did grow their own vegetables and their own food, and they were kind of reliant on, like, how the crops were and all of that. And there just seemed to be much more of a connection in that way, that people had that direct relationship because they were working and focused on that themselves. They weren't going off to a supermarket.
hmm Yeah. The problem, the problem with look, the biggest problem the way we're treating the earth today, in my opinion, is industrial farming and the amount of chemicals and the the the, the attack on diversity, um, and the poison that we're pouring on the earth, and the food that we're eating is poisonous
Yeah.
because of those chemicals, and people are getting sicker and sicker And it's a direct reflection of the sickness that we're pouring into the earth. And we can't possibly survive that. Now, the amount of power that those companies have, they, they constantly telling people all these lies that the only way we're going to feed the world is by continuing down this awful path. And that's just such a load of rubbish. Like
Yeah.
that. I mean, the nobody has to feed the world. You have to support everybody to feed themselves. Like the abundance in the earth that's available to us if we just allow it. If we just allow it and we connect with it and we work with the earth to grow our own food. And that's what I've been asking people to do in this book, is that the most important thing to do to reconnect with the earth is actually to go back to looking after those little pieces of land that you can, to personally call your own, personally say, I'm responsible for this little piece of land. And they generally are your gardens, if you're lucky enough to have one. And in that space, you have to go back to growing your own food and doing it in a way that allows the land to become what it wants to become, and creating a very healthy system. And the difference between that food and the food you're buying in the supermarket is like black and white.
Yeah, there's no comparison, is there?
No, but there's a magic in it that people don't talk. And that's the magic that I want to talk about.
Yeah.
Is that if you have a relationship with your land, you're just like a walking plant on that land. Okay, you just don't have roots, not physical roots. Okay, so like the plants that are on that land, they have all these amazing connections with the fungi and the bacteria in the soil. So if any of those plants, and it's a healthy piece of land with undisturbed soil, so there's this huge ecosystem underground. And if one of those plants needs a nutrient or isn't well or needs more water or anything like that, everything is available to it there. So if there's something that it's missing in its diet, for example, it provides sugars from carbohydrates from photosynthesis through its roots to these fungi and bacteria, who the fungi will go and get whatever nutrients it needs through its huge system of mycorrhizae under the soil, and it'll transport them back along the mycorrhizae network and give it to the plants in return for the carbohydrates from photosynthesis, right?
Yeah.
Now, those plants and fungi and bacteria, they all talk to each other, and they know what the plants need. And the plants need to be healthy for those creatures to be healthy. So it's a synchronistic system. But if you're working with your land and you're walking around in your bare feet occasionally, and you have connections with the earth, the enzymes in your skin will react with the bacteria in the soil. They'll get to know each other, and they will know if you're missing stuff in your diet. They will know if you're not well, and everything will be provided through the plants in your garden for what you need. There's a real connection that we've forgotten.
Yeah.
And there's this absolute disconnection from our abilities to talk to all these creatures, our abilities to I mean, I talk to these creatures all the time, and they listen, and it's not stupid or funny, which is what. But I'm not thinking you think that, but a lot of people think that like, just say there's always this war against slugs in Ireland because it's so wet, and snails, but I have a very interesting way of working with them, is that I just talk to them and I explain to them where my compost area is and where they can, or like, I have a compost heap which is on the other side of the house that I live in, and I explained to them that they have to go and eat over there, that they can't have my food, that there isn't enough of it, but there's an awful lot of compost over there and they'd be doing a really good job. So they always leave immediately. And they never
Brilliant.
eat food. And it's the same with caterpillars or anything like that. If they come in and they're attacking my Brussels sprouts or whatever it is that I have growing, I explain to them very, very clearly and succinctly with like you'd speak to a child. You'd be very careful. And you'd be very respectful and honor the fact that they are doing a really important job in the world, and they need to eat. So they can have this one, they can have this cabbage, but I said, if you can stick to that, it would be really great. If you need to move on to the one beside it, that's okay. But if you can stick to this one, that would be great. They immediately move overnight to that particular cabbage, and they eat everything on it. And they might have to go on to the next one because they might need to eat, but they leave the rest alone. And it works with deer, it works with rabbits, it works with everything. We have forgotten that we have the ability to communicate with everything.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
all there,
And
just
so,
forgotten.
Mary, what advice would you give to somebody who is listening to this and they're thinking, yeah, I really do, I want to sort of reconnect more with this, but here I am living in my inner city apartment, working really long hours, stuck in an office with fluorescent light. What would you say to somebody that's really wanting to sort of reconnect with nature, even in a small way? How can they bring more of that into their life if they're in this artificial environment most of the time?
Yeah, it's a difficult one,
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard on people. Um, I guess I thought a lot about this, and I think the only option is to ask for some land somewhere. I mean, if you're, I don't know how it works over there, but
Do you
in
mean like
Ireland you have
community gardens and things like local councils,
local council,
allotments?
yeah, allotments, community gardens to try and find pieces of earth that you can work with, and that you can mind, or to go to somebody who's an older person who has a big garden that they can't mind and work with them in return for the company. You can, and sharing the produce, you can work with that land to bring it back to health and to grow food for you and your family. I mean, there's an awful lot of land around where people are just paying other people to mind it because they don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And you have to be creative and you have to be inventive. And, there's a major problem with distribution of land. I mean, most of the multinationals are buying up all of the land. And at some point, we're probably going to have to take it back.
Yeah.
But, and that probably sounds like a very revolutionary thing to say, but it's more than likely going to be our only option, because it's just a very unfair distribution of land right now. And a lot of the small farmers are not able to support themselves in the way that they're farming. And because they're spending most of their money on chemicals, and seeds that they can't afford to buy again the following year. And so multinationals are buying up the land. I mean, it's just this really subversive, horrible thing that's happening. So we have to be very mindful of the fact that eventually we have to stop these very, very bad people destroying the earth. We're going to have to become powerful and say stop,
And take drastic action. And I saw an expression that I thought was really interesting, of an article that's from an excerpt from that World as Lover, World as Self, saying, we need to dismantle the ego self and create the eco self. And I thought that is such a great, succinct, sentence that kind of encapsulates all of that, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, because once you realize that your role here in the planet is one of guardian, I mean, every single creature that lives on this earth has a very important role in this whole cycle of life, this circle of life, except for us. People don't have a role. Not in the same way. Our role is to be the guardians, is to look after it. I mean, it's in all the religions in the world, it's very, very clear that that was what our role was. It's all become messed up now. But even in the book of Genesis, it says it. We are the guardians of this place. It's everywhere. It says it, and yet we seem to have forgotten it weirdly. But if you remember that that's what our role is, then everything falls into place, because it's very, very simple. Life is very, very simple. We're here to look after all of these creatures on this planet. And then suddenly you cannot look at factory farms in the same way. You
No.
cannot look at gardens in the same way. Everything changes when you realize that's all we're here for, is to mind this place. And if we mind it, even the little pieces we can mind ourselves, it'll completely change us as well. We step back into our own power, into our own full health. It's I mean, rather than always worrying about stuff or trying to form connections through, sex or
Or any
drugs,
addictive behavior,
gambling,
really.
stuff. Just all connection seeking stuff.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
that direct connection which we have with the earth will fill up that hole in our hearts, and it'll change everything for us.
It
You know.
really does. And, like you say with your book, that you've written everything that you sort of believe and that you've experienced and you've learned through this process about becoming a guardian and not a gardener. So, how do you see yourself then as evolving in the future if you're not doing work in the same kind of way? Like, because obviously a lot of what you're doing as well, and like with the TED talk that you did, you're really educating.
Yeah. I don't. I have some land here where I live in south of Ireland, and in Wexford, and my plan is to grow a kind of a physical version of the book
Yeah,
on the land, and I'm trying to do that. It's a slow process,
yeah,
and when it's up and running, um, then I can ask people, if they want to come and stay here and learn and do workshops, or just come and visit, that they'd be welcome. So basically, I just want to stay on my land and grow food, and just do my own work. And if other people want to come and learn, that's great. I mean, I don't have, but then life is always bringing me in different directions. I mean,
yeah.
like, when you have a film made about you, you're going to have other doors open up and other opportunities. But that's all I really want to do right
Yes.
now.
And
Yeah.
so on that, because, that's quite extraordinary that you ended up having that film made. So how did that come about, if you don't mind me asking? Because I just think that is fascinating that obviously that captured a period in your life where you were having that experience. So, how do you manifest somebody doing that and coming into your
I,
life? So clearly whatever you're doing is working.
yeah, it's funny. I've always been able to manifest pretty much anything I want.
Yeah.
Now, that is slightly different these days because I kind of have gone into a cocoon. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So now I'm afraid to manifest things, because after a while I realized a lot of it came with stuff that I didn't want it to come with. So and now I'm very, very careful about that. But when I was younger, yeah, I thought it'd be great to have a film made about me, and very, very quickly that happened.
Wow.
And it came from an ego place. It wasn't like it came from a good place. And then I realized very quickly that this is quite a dangerous thing to do. Therefore, I put all my energy into it becoming something very, very positive for nature.
Yes.
And that's what happened, is that it's a very, very simple film. It's very beautiful. And
No, it's
it's
very life affirming and it has got a very positive takeaway.
yeah, and people really love it. I get emails from all over the world saying how it's really helped them reconnect with nature, which is amazing to me, because it's obviously helping people who are very, very far away from
Yeah.
nature find their way back. In a very it's like a beginning step to remembering what's important, or something like that. I don't know, but it's working anyway. Um, so it's great. Yeah. A woman asked me, could she do it? Actually, it's not just her. Other people had asked me, could they make a film about it before her. It wasn't. And then I didn't like what they came up with, but I liked what she came up with, because she had the nature stuff at its core,
Yeah,
So
absolutely. So it had the right intention.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, such a powerful message. So thank you. And I just thought I'd close with one of the things that really jumped out at me, like one of the things that you said that I just thought, yeah, that just really resonates with me so much, is when you say that we're drawn to certain locations where the land resonates with us. People can spend their entire lives looking for places where they belong, places where they feel at home, where they fit and can comfortably set down roots. We are simply a reflection of the land beneath us, and nature is always waiting for us to return home. And I just thought, wow, yeah, and it's to me, that's really about that reconnecting with your own heart and, what's at the core of you and your own innate wisdom and nature.
Yeah, yeah. It's very simple stuff, really, isn't it? Just finding your way home, and it is back to your own heart. But the magic in this is if you work with the land that you found yourself with and heal it, as it's quite a slow process. It takes about as much time to grow a child as it does to grow a piece of land back to health. And if you work with it over that time, you will find your own heart is healed and your own body is healed, and you find your way back. And so there's a kind of a dynamic and synchronistic process there when you find the land that wants to work with you.
Yeah, beautiful. Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much. And I was just thinking then about the heart chakra, that resonating with the green color of nature as well. And I thought, there's really something in that that's so true, but it's so simple and profound, isn't it?
It's lovely. I'd forgotten.
Yeah, so thank you. Thank you so much for your time today, and really looking forward to see what you develop on your piece of land over the next few years.
Yeah, me too.
Can't wait. So, yeah, that sounds very exciting.
Thanks, Michelle. It's lovely to talk to you, girl.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Unclassified Woman. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. For information on events and services, connect with Michelle at michellemariemcgrath.com.